7 sections of trail have been built and are currently popular hiking trails. Once connected, this trail system will create a 30-kilometer continuous, scenic, mostly flat, historic, recreation and transportation corridor. But what was the Great Canal?
Hi, I'm Ingrid Newman, and I'm with the Ribbons of Green Trail Society. And today we're speaking with Bob Davidson.
Bob Davidson is a second-generation farmer with Davison Orchards, located along Bella Vista Road in Vernon, British Columbia. The Davison family has been farming on this land for 87 years and growing apples since 1933. Today, 4 generations of Davisons are actively working together as a team in the family business. Davison Orchards is adjacent to the historic Grey Canal irrigation system, which played an important role for the orchard business.
The Great Canal is just behind your orchard here. So what memory do you have of the Great Canal?
Well, I grew up under an apple tree, and irrigation was absolutely essential. And my dad passed away in '37, in the fall of '37. We moved to Vernon, and Tom Davison, who was my dad's brother, and his wife was my mother's sister, so there was close genetics there. He was extremely good to me as I grew up. And I grew up in South Vernon, just a little bit beyond the sewer plant. It was all small orchards at that time, and of course they were all irrigated. There was absolutely, you grew nothing to speak of other than grains without irrigation. So it was a big issue. And one of the earliest things I remember about the Grey Canal, I went with Tom up to the orchard, and it was, in that world it was quite a little thing for a boy. It was about, I'd be about 5 or maybe 6, but probably 5 at that time. And we went up along where the flumes were, and the VID was rebuilding the what is known as the number 16 flume. It was the highest flume on the irrigation system, and it was numbered 16, and there was 1 or 2 further along the canal, so it was probably at least 18 flumes, significant to be named. Anyhow, I remember that, and they just demolished the flume, and that was the chit-chat about knocking it down to rebuild it. At that time, I knew nothing about it, but I realized since it was really the efforts of Bombro that had saved the irrigation system on the Bella Vista and the west side of Swan Lake. The siphon had to be renewed across the end of Swan Lake, and without it, there was no water. And Bombro Senior was very dominant that they were going to renew that siphon, and it had been recommended by engineers from the water rights or water department in Victoria that it be abandoned beyond the BX. And Bomro fought that and was successful. And what we had in the 40s and through 50s and today is a credit to Mr. Bomro in my estimation.
When you were growing up, you actually saw the canal, the water?
Even when I was ran the orchard from about 52 on, for a number of years we were dependent on the canal, and it was in the days of Dobson was the manager of the VID at that time, Ken Dobson, and Ken had was an engineer as well as and he did a lot to alleviate seepage. Now, I don't know what percentage of water was lost through seepage from headgates to the spillway at Kin Beach, but I would guess it would be about at least a quarter to a third of the water that was diverted up at the headgates would be lost through seepage in one way or another. There was that was always a major problem. But Ken, for the world he worked in, contributed a lot to fighting and helping to alleviate the seepage.
Where was this water coming from, and how did it get from there to here?
There's a very interesting man that was the manager of the Coldstream Ranch. And this man's name was Ricardo. Ricardo was a visionary, probably the biggest visionary Vernon ever had. We should have a statue to him, and without his vision, I don't think we would be very much in Vernon. He visualized the possibilities. Now you gotta remember, before him, there were small irrigation systems dug, ditches, distribution. There was early ones at the Coldstream Ranch, South Vernon. There was quite a number. But Ricardo thought big. I just say to you that I admire this man and his vision. He saw the possibility of Doodle Creek, which is beyond Blue Nose, and diverting it through siphons and canals and flumes all the way around Vernon, across the valley of the north end of Swan Lake, down from Goose Lake as a reservoir to Oakenard Landing, and his vision was bigger than whatever was done. He had visualized irrigating the commonage from this side, a siphon across the valley. Now, the war comes in 1914. There's no more money for wild dreams and visionaries, and they never did develop the commonage area. Ricardo was the visionary of the Vernon area. That's my opinion.
So, in the Great Canal, it's not like it is today. You turn it on whenever you want. And so, when did it start? The water start running that you could access?
Well, they start water in probably early May. They turn the water on, and the first probably 4 weeks was called flood. And that was very cheap. There was very little charge for that because the water was run off below the reservoir at Aberdeen Lake. And it was running down the Shuswap River eventually and into Thompson and the Fraser. And it was lost. And so the cost of the flood water in May would be very low. When they started to use storage water, then the cost was there. And you had to justify, the management of the VID had to justify all the flumes and the expensive diversions and so on. And so the storage water was quite costly. You had a tax. All the land under the system was taxed. Then when you used water, it was measured.
When the water came along the canal, how did you get it from the canal onto your...
It was measured. You had, it ran over that weir. They measured it. And generally it was anywhere from 4 to 6 inches over the 90-degree weir. And it was measured by the hour. How many hours? And if you paid for it that way, they measured it. Acre feet. After so many hours, you'd have an acre foot of water, an acre 12 inches over an acre, and that was how it was costed out to the farmer. And that was done all through the irrigation system and Coldstream and BX and Bella Vista area was all paid for by the amount you used.
So the water started running in May, and then would it run out at some point?
Well, they generally shut it off in the first weeks of September. I understand from what I've heard by the old timers that in the 1930s there was 2, maybe 3 very dry seasons, and they ran out of water, storage water, and so the season was cut short. Now, at that time, at the top of Bella Vista Road or Davison Road, there was a cabin, and there was a water bailiff that was had it there, and he had the first phone, I guess, on the Bella Vista in Hawaii. And they control the amount of water that he had to work with, and he would arrange every day for a certain amount to be released. They tried not to waste any water down the lake into the open Arden Lake on the spillway. There was no point in that.
Absolutely. So did it just drain into the fields then, or did
that was up to the farmer how he handled the water. Now he couldn't waste it; it was too costly.
Absolutely.
And you got to remember, in that world, farm produce was the value was significant. Without it, you couldn't pay the taxes. There was a lot of land under the irrigation system that in the 30s couldn't pay the taxes, and so the farmer would be very careful how he handled the water because he was paying for everything. He didn't waste it.
Right.
Now, when you grew tomatoes, you watered about every 4 feet. Tomatoes would be roughly 4 feet apart. It was not a very good way to irrigate. You washed the soil away, and it was very obvious when the gas company came through the Bella Vista and with a rotary trencher, that the hillsides were very short of topsoil. It had been over 30, 40 years, it had been washed away. So you had to be very careful how you handled your water, and you needed a lot of attention and careful, or you were destroying your farm.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you grew apples here. What other fruits and vegetables?
Well, in the 30s, when Tom Davison came here in 33, he was able to buy it with the help of the BC fruit shippers. Joe Montague he was able to buy this lot, and about 20 acres was in nice young orchard. In the world we live in, it's pretty well all obsoleted varieties now, but in that day, Macintosh was king, and there were quite a few Dutches and Wealthies, and they were delicious, just known as delicious. There was about 20 acres of orchard and about 15 acres open land, and he grew vegetables, he grew tomatoes and as a small boy, about, I think it would be in 38 or 39, he was still growing cabbage and tomatoes.
What would you say are some successes of the canal?
Well, I think you could say the fact that Vernon developed a toll is you've got to give Ricardo and the canal, the Coldstream Ranch, Lord Aberdeen's money into a dream, and it's life being what it is. You a lot of times you don't see the benefits of what you work at. I think if Aberdeen could come back and see the Vernon area and the Coldstream area, and even the Kelowna area, because they started in the Kelowna area, it would be quite a thing for him to see. And I understand he lost his, or spent his fortune. Probably the ranch was the biggest drain. I don't know about that, but, and it was the Buchanan family, the black and white whiskey family of Scotland, that ended up owning it sometime around 1918 or somewhere in that period. The Buchanans sold it to the Balkan's got it now, and in many ways he's enlarged it and condensed it, both.
That was successes, the Great Canal, and some weaknesses it may have had?
Well, I think probably one of the weaknesses was the materials it was built with. The life expectancy was short, 20 years or 30 years, probably in that period, and then it had to be replaced. And that was in Bombro, and Tassie was the engineer at that time, and they deserve a lot of credit because when they rebuilt, they used a lot of concrete and materials that would stand up for a long time, and were in use when it was the total idea of putting it under pipe and pressurized came in. And I think, I hate to mention this because this is politics, but it was in the period of Diefenbaker when the idea of ARDSA came in. The feds put up a third, the provincial government put up a third, and the ratepayers put up a third. And the Vernon system was estimated to cost about $8 million to renovate. And without the two senior governments, it never would have happened. It would have disappeared. Anyhow, you have to give those men, Diefenbaker, his administration, you have to give Bennett a lot of credit. And the vision even of the trustees to think big at that time.
The Vernon irrigation.
And now it's not so big. There's opportunities now, big opportunities. But we need people like Ricardo and Bombro and a lot of people like that. And we need big thinking.
Do you think the Great Canal had any firsts for agriculture?
Well, I think there were people that saw the possibilities. I think you've got to look at what happened to Vernon. You had the beginnings of the Great Canal to irrigate the Coldstream and Lavington areas, and it came around in what is South BX, this by 1900. And sometime about that time, those Belgians had a lot of money. Remember, there's no war. Europe is flush with money and a lot of dreamers. Some pretty big, some not so. Out of Belgium comes the Land and Agriculture Company. You got to really get your head around what they did. There's nothing really in the museum written about the land and agriculture people. They put up a lot of money to what was the canal system owned by the Colston Ranch, and they took the canal across the BX and eventually across a siphon to Goose Lake. You've got to give those Belgians a lot of credit for their vision to irrigate the BX, and look at when I grew up, there was at least 6, 7 packing houses shipping fruit out of Vernon. Vernon Fruit Union being the big one, but there were other major shippers. Vegetables, Gulf Brown dominated, but he wasn't the only one. So you got to see what water has done for Vernon.
Absolutely.
Without that vision.
Well, speaking of visions, so the Ribbons of Green Trail Society, one of our visions is to reuse that canal land as a trail system.
Yeah, that's interesting. That trail, I mentioned to you earlier, I wasn't really enthusiastic about it to start with because all I could see was the cattle grazing on the hill and the gates. There's the canal and the fence line went across the canal, and who was going to keep the gates, in charge of the gates? And that was my big fear. Well, the O'Keefe Range is fenced now, and the farmers have spent a fortune on fencing, and the deer are the problem, and so fencing has become very dominant. Wherever you've got agriculture, you've got to keep those four-legged critters out. I haven't a great deal of love for them. When the canal was abandoned, it wasn't that many years ago, 40, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. What a difference. Even the Bella Vista has become quite a residential area. People are walking. Town people drive out and park and walk the canal. And Davison Orchards, that when in that world we hauled everything to a shipper and it was gone. And my son married a girl from Edmonton who knows how to merchandise, and she told me she could sell apples. Well, I thought that was a joke. I just about didn't tell her that, but I thought it was a joke because I'd seen a number of well-paid people try and sell apples and it had failed. Well, to keep the story very short, Davison Orchards has done very well, and today we've got people moving around. Normally, without this pandemic, the Albertans are here in droves, and they're looking for an experience. You got to remember they don't know a thing about our type of farming, and so they come from a farm. It's an education, it's an interest. We make the best of it by introducing them to our farm and to what we do and how we do it. Now, our farm is a little different than most of the orchards in that we sell our produce ourselves. And I just say to you, product we grow, whether it's apples or whatever it be, is quite a bit different than what you would grow if you were shipping it. We try to grow varieties that are ready and mature when the customer's here. So a lot of our apples come in August. I'm thinking of one or two, I'll mention one or two, but one is Silken. It's a wonderful apple. It came from the research station at Summerland. It's almost unknown outside of direct marketers. And then there's another one that's a little later, but Aurora, you can't get it anywhere else. Everybody else has written it off, but it's a yellow apple. It's a wonderful apple. We don't grow, we grow a lot of them, but we don't grow more than we think we are able to merchandise. So what we grow, we try to figure out, we've got to merchandise it. And so that's maybe the why we're here, we're merchandising what we grow to a big or large extent. And some of that merchandising is all local, and some of it is a little bit further afield. Well, you know, this walking on this great canal, there's a couple of gaps in it that are slowly getting tied together. One at the end of Davison Road up here is a gap that I understand they purchased the trail, and then there might be one more along the west side. I'm not even sure of that, but I just say slowly they're getting these gaps tied in. The Great Canal actually went through a tunnel above the old garbage dump, the dump on Dump Road, where the pound is, above there. Okay. Instead of building a flume around the rock, they tunneled it through the rock. There was a lot of engineering that went into its development. You know, I think you have to give a lot of credit to some of these early visionaries. And overall, we don't do that. Aberdeen, you know, he started his first venture was in Kelowna. And when the ranch was sold, he bought that ranch, and I just say to you, it was quite a undertaking. I think it probably milked him to his wealth. Was probably a great part of it was he was Governor General, and that's was quite a thing. He was recognized beyond this area, but I just say I think there's several people that should really be recognized.
Do you know anything about the Earl Grey?
Well, Grey was a Governor General, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
He donated the Grey Cup. He had a farm somewhere
by Lavington.
At Lavington. That's about all I know about it. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand they named the canal, so he must have had quite an influence after him. And, you know, when we talk about history, and they teach history, so often they go by the textbook, but they miss the local aspect of it. And this valley, there was some very interesting people.
I think you're included as one of them.
No, I'm a latecomer, I'm nothing. This number 16 flume, this was above the orchard. Wow. And that was the highest flume on the system.
Was it? Okay.
And 16, it was rebuilt in 1939. And that's really the earliest I remember there. But vaguely I can remember that.
Wow. And this is it again?
Yeah, this is looking right down on the top. This is looking, Okanagan Lake is down there. This box was up under the flume. On this side, there's you can still see there, that was level with that. So the old water bailiff who walked the canal every day, he would come with his ruler and he'd measure how much water you had. Generally, Davison's would take 4.5 inches, maybe 5. It depends. And that would be going over this weir, 5 inches. That little staple in the bottom there is the same as that. It was level. We hope. Sometimes they weren't. But anyway, the water in some way or another came up in this side, sometimes in the bottom with a pipe on this side. And this rack that was across here was on a 2x4, and it was offset with planks, and so the water was still in here. On this side it was still, and it ran over that. That's how they measured it and got the acre feet that you were using.
Amazing.
Yeah, hey.
And so was there one for each orchardist then?
Yes, we had 3 on this place. You'd have to give him 24 hours because he'd have to adjust the flow at Goose Lake, and then he had to even coordinate it with what was coming from Headgates to Goose Lake. It wasn't a hit and a miss. Today it's in a pipe, and the pressure and what is so simple. But those days it was a lot of guessing and crude measurements and the experience. This one was where the flume was, and that's why down here you can see that piece that's been covered in the concrete. That's where the pipe would have come in normally. But this one being where the flume was, it flowed in different.
So that number 16 flume went right across that face of the rock right there. Okay.
Yeah, it was the highest flume. 16 was the highest flume on the system. It wasn't the longest by a long shot, but it was the highest. And Bombro and Tassie rebuilt that and the date is on here somewhere. Where is the date? 39. Right here, June 6, I think it is, 39 when this was poured.
Very cool. So now the water came from...
Yes, imagine that. Blue Nose is where it came from.
Okay. And then it followed, you said it went down the valley.
It came around the east side of Vernon.
Right.
It was around to the BX Creek, where it comes down off Silver Star in 1909. And that's when the Belgians poured money into the pot to extend the BX. And then it crossed the valley.
By Swan Lake, the north end of
Yeah,
Swan Lake.
up into Goose Lake.
Goose Lake.
And Goose Lake became the reservoir.
Okay.
Kind of an equalizing reservoir. They had some extra water there if they were short, and they could get rid of extra if they were long.
Okay.
And then it went down all the way to Kin Beach.
So it came around Turtle Mountain.
Yeah,
Behind
well,
your orchard. And or those people are
at Turtle Mountain, that was called the Knight Siphon.
Okay.
The Knight, he was involved in the construction. There was several Knights, but the Knights owned where this whole subdivision now, along where what I call Kamloops Road.
Okay.
And the Knight Siphon was there, and it was rebuilt about, I think it was, the last time it was rebuilt was in 1950. You've got to hand it to, the vision they had to cross. When they get to a rock pile, they build a flume around it. And then they got to another rock pile and they drilled a tunnel through it. Yeah. And then another one, they built a siphon around it. Well, it's quite, they were quite...
Yes, yeah.
There's not much left after 40 years or so. And that, actually, the roads were built, in Dobson was manager, and he converted from ditch walkers to little Austin junk cars they had, trucks, and it eliminated about 2/3 of the ditch walkers, or the water bailiff was a better name.
Yeah.
The flume went across the face of that rock. That was the highest flume on the system. It was 38 feet.
38 feet. Wow.
In one section. And when you think about, they brought water from in the clouds, from Blue Nose, beyond Blue Nose.
Aberdeen Lake.
Eh?
Aberdeen Lake?
Well, Aberdeen Lake is more on the top up here,
Okay.
but Aberdeen is about 4,000 feet,
Yeah.
and where Vernon was 1,100.
Okay.
So you can see there's quite a difference in snowpack and a lot of other things. Gravity, the greatest force.
Love was the greatest force.
Gravity is the greatest force, according to Einstein. You know, the engineering of it was remarkable. And you remember they dug the thing with horses and scrapers, and they did have a steam shovel, maybe two, originally.
But even if you look here, this is the land that wasn't irrigated. Like it looks like.
No,
desert,
this was outside.
But look at how desert it is.
Oh yeah,
Then you look-
sagebrush. Look at it.
Yes, and then you look where it has been irrigated. It's two different worlds.
Hey, you got it. You really said it.
And there we.
It's so cool here how you can see that.
Yes,
Below
yes.
is green, above
Yes.
is dry.
And so that's what Vernon would be if we.
Yeah, that's right.
If we hadn't irrigated it.
You know, that's why I think the Ricardo's got to be given credit for his vision.
And then so you grew apples here.
Oh yeah, ours was all apples.
All apples. You
Yeah.
didn't try other fruit.
Oh, no, no, there was a few pears, just a handful,
Okay.
in the original planting.
Okay. So there were a lot of people of Japanese descent
Oh,
here.
yeah, well look, the hall, that red
Okay.
roof building,
Yes.
that used to be a ramshackled farmer's hall. That's where they had their parties, their weddings, and all the rest of it. And they built part of that in the 50s, and then Trudeau, when he was Prime Minister, he gave grants out for
Okay.
and culture, and I think it was positive. I wouldn't badmouth him in the slightest. And that's when they built the front part of that hall.
Okay. The Japanese descended grew vegetables.
Well, they were basically vegetable growers, and the Bowmans and the Packenhouses relied on this area all the way to the other end of Swan Lake on this side. I think there were vegetables in the Coldstream and
Yes.
quite a few, but this is where was the backbone of the tomatoes. Today we don't think of that because everything is power, pumps and whatever.
Yeah.
But that canal was 100% gravity.
Yeah, that is wild.
And to think he started at Blue Nose and ended up at
That's
Kin Beach,
Yes.
above Kin Beach. The spillway went down there. That's where
So some of it still ran away. You had too
well,
much.
every irrigation system legally has to have a spillway.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you don't want